So this is a blockchain special interest group event, and the topic for today is investigating cryptocurrencies, so tracking and recovering crypto. The reason why I decided to speak on this topic is because last year, towards the end of last year, a colleague of mine at work asked me to help them try and recover some funds that they had invested in a scheme. The person had run away and they didn't know what to do. So I did try and help track it, and I was able to track some of the information, but unfortunately wasn't able to recover funds. But it led me to start thinking about how one would go about properly investigating cryptocurrency, especially if there's a scam, and how to help people to actually try and recover it. It is very difficult, but you can try. So hope everyone will enjoy the presentation, and I think I'll kick it off now. I'm just going to try and mute everyone. Okay, here we go. Right, so in terms of contents, we'll firstly look at some blockchain technical foundation. So this is important because to understand how to track crypto, you have to understand a little bit about how blockchains work. I know Bitcoin the best, so I'm gonna speak on mostly Bitcoin and how it works, but a lot of what I say can be applied to other blockchains as well. And then we'll look at some specific tools and techniques for tracking crypto. So this is free software online that can be used and can help you try and track down the crypto. And then the difficult topic of recovering crypto. So this borders on a little bit, borders on the legal side of things, because it's not possible to actually get crypto back because you'd need the help of law enforcement, etc. But you can gather information that will help, maybe investigators or law enforcement to help you get back your crypto. So let's start off with the Bitcoin addresses. So Bitcoin address, that's the way that payments happen in Bitcoin. So you can send money to a Bitcoin address, and a Bitcoin address is formed from a public key. The public key is just a random number, 256 bits long, and then it's hashed using a secure hash algorithm, and there are the race integrity primitives messaging digest. And a hash is a good cryptographic function because it's a one-way cryptographic function, and you can't reverse it. And that's why it is hashed, so that it can't be reversed, so that the private key can be discovered. Then once you get this double hashing, then the result is a public key hash, which is 20 bytes long. And that public key hash is base 58 check encoded. So base 58 check encoding is simply turning it into a more simpler form. So it's made up of numbers and letters. And the nice thing about base 58 is it removes confusing things like 0 and O and makes it more readable. So your Bitcoin address is a base 58 check encoded public key hash. And if we look at transactions and how they are formed, so a transaction has a transaction hash, which is a unique number, and it's made up of inputs and outputs. So if we look at the first example on screen, you can see that a person called Sam has sent some Bitcoin to a person called Jack. So Sam was able to find some unspent outputs that he owns, and then he sent it off to Jack's address. So he sent off 0.1006 Bitcoin, and it went 0.1 went to Jack's address, and the rest is seen as a transaction fee. So transaction fees are important because they help you get processed on the blockchain. Because if you don't have a transaction fee, then it might take a long time, or your transaction might not get processed on the blockchain at all. So once Jack receives this funds, then it's now an unspent output that he can use in his next transaction. So Jack purchases something from Timber, okay, and so Jack's wallet picks up that he has 0.1 Bitcoin that available, and he sends 0.044 Bitcoin to Timber's address. The rest is split up into change that goes back to an address that he owns, and then transaction fees. So it works similar to how you would pay cash in a shop. So if you pay 100 Rand for a 50 Rand item, you would expect to get back 50 Rand in change. And so Bitcoin works the same. So if you send out a large amount for a payment, you will get change back as well. Then Timber now owns 0.044 Bitcoin, and he can use that in his next transaction to XYZ stationery. So you can see here that Timber's wallet picks up that he has 0.044 in unspent output, and Timber sends 0.0022 to XYZ stationery, receives back 0.0016 in change, and the rest is transaction fees. So, I mean, in summary, transactions are made up of inputs and outputs. So when a wallet tries to determine if a Bitcoin address has funds available, it looks at unspent outputs that are available to spend, and that's how it knows the balance of an individual that owns some Bitcoin. So in terms of structure, an output has a Bitcoin value in Satoshis. So Satoshi is the smallest unit of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is up to 8 decimal places, and Satoshi is that 8th decimal place. And that's how it's reflected on the structure of the output. And then you have a locking script. So this is a script that defines the conditions needed to spend the output. We'll look a little bit more at that just now. And then in terms of input, an input has a transaction hash, which points to an output. Remember, in order to spend something, the individual trying to spend must have unspent transactions sitting against an address that person owns. The output index is the index of that unspent transaction, and there's an unlocking script. So this script fulfills the conditions of the unspent output to spend. So it unlocks. It has conditions that allow it to unlock a unspent output. So if we look at a script that's used to actually lock and unlock Bitcoin transaction, so the unlock script is provided by the users wishing to spend the output, and then the lock script is found in the transaction output. And you can see that it's made up of operation codes and also public keys and signatures. So let's look a little bit more closely at this in terms of how it's processed in a Bitcoin transaction. So the script is executed from left to right, and it's a simple stack-based model. So in a stack, you have items pushed onto a stack, and then it's popped off to remove the item of the stack. So it's a very simple mechanism. So if we start from where the green arrow is, the first item is the signature of the person wishing to spend the funds. So that signature is popped onto the stack. If we look at the green arrow, it moves on to the public key of the person wishing to spend the transactions. The public key is popped onto the stack. And then the next operation is dupe, which stands for duplicate. So what happens is whatever's on the stack, which is public key, is duplicated. So now you have 2 instances of public key placed on the stack. Then if we move on, the next operation is hash 160, which then hashes the public key, the last public key. And what we have on the stack is placed the public key hash. Then the public key hash on the output script is then placed on top of the stack. The next operation is equal verify. So what happens, it checks the two public hashes to see if they are equal. If they're equal, then they are popped off the stack, and you're left with just the signature and the original public key sign, right? And what happens is that the next operation is check signature. So it checks that the signature and the public key are both from the same private key. And if it's true, then both are popped off the stack, and just true remains on the stack. And that ensures that your Bitcoin transaction has verified that the transaction is actually a valid one, or the payment that's about to happen is valid here. So the next thing to discuss is blocks. So blocks are important, especially in the blockchain and Bitcoin. It's where all the transactions are stored. Also, so a block is made up of a version number, a previous block hash. So that's a reference to the hash of the previous block in the chain. So this is where the immutability of the blockchain comes in, because each block references the prior block. You can't change the contents of the prior block without breaking the entire chain. So that's the purpose of that previous block hash. The next item is the Merkle root. So these store the transactions, but stores it in a special way called a Merkle tree. And it's a very efficient way of storing transactions, which we will talk about in a little bit. Then the timestamp creation of the block. Target and nonce are used for proof of work processing. We won't go too much into that because that's outside the scope of the discussion. Then if you look at blocks, so blocks obviously chain to each other, and they have, as mentioned previously, that's that previous hash that chains one block to another. The other interesting thing is that sometimes one or even two blocks can reference the same or chain back to the same previous block. And this is because during the mining process, it's possible for more than one miner to actually solve the proof of work algorithm at the same time. So you end up with a situation of a fork where there's more than one block pointing to the prior block, but eventually these are resolved. It's always the longest chain that survives, and these forks are discarded as the longest chain finds its way out of all the consensus mechanisms run by all the nodes. So as mentioned previously, Merkle trees are used to store transactions, and they're a very efficient way. And what happens is that you have these different transactions belonging to the block, and the transactions are hashed. So you have 4 transactions. You have hash of A, hash of B, hash of C, and hash of D. So this is rolled up, and you get a hash of AB, hash of CD, and then it's further rolled up into the hash of AB and the hash of CD. So eventually you get the hash of ABCD, which is a very efficient way of storing the entire transaction tree into one root. So that's just a basic overview of how especially the Bitcoin blockchain works. So it obviously doesn't do justice to the full complexity of the technology, but it gives an idea of how it works. And you can use this information to actually track the flow of money and transactions on the blockchain. You can use a few tools. The one is blockchain info. So blockchain info has an explorer. It also has an API that you can use for to actually see details of transactions. There's also the wallet explorer, which you can use for clustering, trying to cluster similar addresses together. Then oxt.me gives you graphical information about an address. So it gives you useful statistics like what times that this address was used and volume of transactions, so that you can start spotting patterns in the behavior of the person using the addresses. So what you see is a screen showing an example of a scam. So this was an entity called Blue Trading, and what they did was they accepted Bitcoin into their wallet from people, and their claim was that they would use automated trading to try and generate profits for people, and you would get the benefits of these any profits generated from the automated trading. But eventually, after a couple of months, they just took all the Bitcoin and they disappeared, and people were left without their funds. So at the top there, we can see what their Bitcoin address was, and we can actually use the blockchain explorer to check what their some more details about this address, right? So on the explorer, if you put in the address, you can see that it has a Bitcoin balance of 0. So this is immediately suspicious because it doesn't have any transactions or funds associated with it at the moment. But we can also see that there was a total of 92 Bitcoin received and a total sent of 97 Bitcoin received and 97 sent out. And so there's 95 transactions in total. So that's some of the useful statistics around this particular address. Then you can also drill down and have a look at the transactions and see who transactions or the Bitcoin addresses that were received from, and then where it was sent out to. So obviously it's the address was received the funds and the change or sent back to the person sending the funds. Blockchain info also provides more details around transactions. So you can see the transaction hashes, the amounts, and other details. Also what date it was broadcasted and the time. Then blockchain info also has an API, so you can actually type in a URL as shown on the screen and put in a transaction hash, and that'll return to you information about the transaction. So a lot of this information is difficult to understand, but it gives you details that can be useful in an investigation. So Wallet Explorer is an interesting tool because what it does is it attempts to group addresses into pseudo wallets. So if you have a Bitcoin address that is the suspicious address, and you know that it was part of a scam, you can actually use Wallet Explorer to give you a list of addresses that it thinks is associated with this. So it could be that the person doing the scam uses quite a number of other addresses. So if you group them together, you can get more information about the person or the entity that's using the set of addresses. So it also lists all the transactions involving the address and clusters of addresses. And also it'll display addresses that it thinks belongs together. So if we look on the screen, I typed in my suspicious address and it gave me a list of other addresses that it thinks is associated with this and was also used by the same group of people or entities that used the original address that I put in. So it allows you to cluster things together, and clustering helps you to identify the people responsible, because if you look at the information belonging to these addresses, you can start picking up patterns and also maybe see patterns of when transactions were actually sent. And by seeing these patterns, you can try and determine the time zone, the people involved, and also perhaps zone in on the location. And so it's very useful to be able to see this kind of information. And if you drill down further into transactions, Wallet Explorer also has a nice feature in that if it recognizes an address as belonging to, for example, a Bitcoin exchange, it will show you what that Bitcoin exchange is, Now, this is extremely useful because if this suspicious person sent an amount to an exchange, you then have a very good opportunity to track that person, because most exchanges keep information about their customers. So most exchanges do know your customer, so they require people to put in their social security numbers or identity numbers or proof of address and some kind of documentation to prove that they're actually a legal person living in the country. So if you have enough proof that this person is a scammer, an exchange can actually be approached to provide details. So obviously, you have to do this in conjunction with law enforcement or some kind of legal person, because an exchange is not obligated to provide that information to just any individual. But if you have enough evidence, and if you have something like a legal document that compels the exchange to give you up the information, then it's possible to get more information about the identity of the person. The next online tool is oxt.me. So this particular piece of software shows information in a nice graphical format. So for my address, is showing, the dates that the address was used, and then it also shows a nice graph showing the volume of transactions, etc. And then it also shows information about times of days, days of weeks that the address was used. And this is, again, is useful information because you can start seeing patterns of behavior, for example, or even try to track down the time zone of the people. And by doing that, you can start narrowing down the area that this individual is actually operating from. But again, this is a lot of investigation work, and it requires a lot of time, and sometimes it's it's quite difficult to do. So the next tool is blockonomics.co. So blockonomics can be used for monitoring addresses. So it's useful when you have a large number of addresses you want to watch, and you can use it to monitor an address when you are the victim of ransomware virus, and you know the address where the attackers want Bitcoin sent to. So you can monitor it to see when it's being used and where it's being sent to, and that kind of information. So this particular online tool allows you to set up a watch on any address, and you'll be able to get notification when it's being used. So when it comes to finding the suspects, so this is the most difficult part because of Bitcoin's pseudonymity, and also because you have a peer-to-peer network where IP addresses are, it's not easy to track IP addresses because the transactions are coming through a peer-to-peer network, and there are a number of nodes involved in any single transaction. Also, there's the legal aspect as well, where it's for an ordinary individual, you can't go and invade another person's privacy just because you suspect that they are the scammer. You have to have real proof before you can do really invasive and privacy, and things that will invade someone's privacy. So this kind of information here it can be done, but you have to be careful and make sure that you're in the confines of the law before you attempt to go any further using this kind of information. So the obvious way to track where a transaction came from is through IP addresses, because this is electronic, and someone on a computer somewhere or a mobile device actually sent a transaction or using the address to send transactions to somewhere else. The the valuable thing, well, not the valuable, but the important thing to know about addresses is that if you have a person sending a transaction from their computer, you can go through a number of peer-to-peer nodes, and so even if you see a IP address on a transaction, so blockchain.info does show an IP address associated with the transaction. That does not mean it's the IP address of the person that sent the transaction. It's more than likely that the IP address of the node where the transaction was processed, because it goes through a peer-to-peer node broadcasting process, and so we're not guaranteed that the node that the IP address is of the person that sent the transaction. So having said that, there is a site called bitnodes.io, which shows the nodes located in every country in the world. So it's a very valuable tool, because you can actually see the nodes in each country, and also be able to drill down into details about the node, the city they're located in, etc. So if you suspecting that you're that the person that has done the scam is located in a certain country, you can then try and narrow it down by looking at the nodes in the country. Obviously, if there are many nodes, it's going to be a very difficult task, but it does provide an opportunity for you to do some investigation by trying to narrow down which actual Bitcoin node is the one doing the processing. You can also use a tool like a P2P network sniffer. Now, there is one Bitcoin sniffer, which is a Python sniffer. It's a very old one, though. It's 11 years old. When I tried to run it on version 3.8 of Python, there were quite a number of compiler errors. I did try to fix some of them, but there was a difficult task, and I didn't want to downgrade my version of Python. So this can be used, but you have to use it with version 2.7 of Python. And what it'll allow you to do is to put in the IP address of the Bitcoin node and be able to see the transactions flowing from that node. So this is a very long shot doing this, but if you can then, if you tracking these transactions, you can see whether your address is in one of them, but it's a very difficult and time-consuming task, but it is possible to use it using a tool like this network sniffer. In order to familiarize yourself with the actual raw transaction data, you can also use Wireshark, which is a freely available tool. So if you have a Bitcoin client node running on your computer, you can actually start looking at the transactions that flow from it using Wireshark and get familiar with how Bitcoin transactions are structured. And by doing that, you can get familiarity with it. And when it comes to a real investigation using the Python P2P sniffer, you'll be able to get a better understanding of how the transactions look and the information in them. Because remember, when it flows over the raw network, it's serialized, so it's in hexadecimal, and you need to understand the serialized version to be able to make sense of the information flowing out. The other important thing is that Bitcoin nodes do broadcast public information. So this is not private information, because a peer-to-peer network is broadcast in a public fashion. So you actually can sniff the data coming from a node, because it's not like private information. So once you have the address, there's also another useful site called Bitcoin Who is Who. If you type in your address, sometimes you may be lucky and it'll tell you who the address belongs to, and or might actually have information about there being a scam associated with that address. So when I put in my particular address, it actually didn't pick up any information about it. It hadn't been registered as a scam. But it's useful because it may give you information about the individual that's behind the scam if you use this particular website. Another tool that can be used is actually Google search, because Google search can obviously provide a lot of information about Bitcoin addresses and who they belong to. So what happens is that there are people that will post Bitcoin addresses, for example, to say, okay, I'm doing some work and I need a donation, for example. They post it on their Facebook pages or their websites. So you can use Google search to try and see if you can identify a Bitcoin address and use it to search for the address and see if it brings back any information about people. But it's important to use modifiers like in title, in text, in URL, site, because that will allow the Google search engine to pinpoint particular sites or particular areas that you want to search. So if you want to search on Facebook and say, search for this address and see if it brings back anything, then you can use the site identifier and so that Google narrows down just on Facebook to search for those addresses. So it can be a useful tool, but obviously if you just use a general search, it might not bring back accurate results. But if you use the modifiers, can help tremendously to actually narrow down the information. So that was pretty much the information I wanted to go through. So I use these references here. So Investigating Cryptocurrencies by Nick Verno, Mastering Bitcoin, and then a couple of articles. So it's not easy to try and track crypto, but there is some methods that you can use to try and narrow down the search, but it is difficult and time-consuming work, and you're always got to be aware of the legal implications of anything that you do, because you can't really invade another person's privacy. We still have a number of minutes left, so if anyone has questions, you can put it in the chat, or I think you can unmute yourself and ask if you so want to. Does anyone have questions about the topic or other matters that you want to discuss? So with these presentations, I see Cabo raised hand. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Okay, my question has been answered. I wanted to check if the likes of, okay, I guess Bitcoin who speaks for itself, would bitnotes.io also just relate to Bitcoin, or would any other tokens?
At the moment, it's mostly it is Bitcoin. So it was created for Bitcoin nodes, yeah. So okay. It can be, yeah. Thank you. See if there's something coming. Okay, so there's a question. Do you have any happy ending stories? So I think that what the person is asking is if there's any crypto tracked, recovered, and handed back to the person. So I haven't personally been involved with recovery, but there was I have been like involved from a far distance with a couple of them. Like there was a mirror trading international scam, so it was actually based in South Africa. So the person accepted Bitcoin and claimed they had a automated trading platform, and was giving profits to people from the automated trading platform. So, but obviously over a period of time, it did last for a number of years, but over a period of time, it was difficult to sustain the scam. So the person just left the country and took all the Bitcoin with them. But through investigation, analysis, and tracking where this person used their Bitcoin, they did manage to track him down in Brazil, and he was apprehended here. So, but I'm not sure if he's been tried at the moment, but that was one story. So it's possible to track people. There's various cases. Also, there's people on the dark web, Silk Road, that were tracked by FBI, for example. But it's a lot of investigation work, and again, you always have to be aware of what's legal and what's not. Yeah. Are there any other questions? I see one popping up. Are there, so Angela Chakupa asks, are there proper Bitcoiners? Are there proper Bitcoiners? Not sure if that's a question, but and if you can expand on the question. And so with the research I did, I also found quite interesting information about how you would, about real investigations as to when people went into actual people's homes. So obviously, the people were tracked, and law enforcement got involved. And what happened was we got so, and what they actually did was, search on hard drives, etc., and search to see if they had wallet software, and to actually recover the private keys, and then open up a new instance of the wallet, and then recover the funds. So very interesting stories out there. So there's a question. I wanted to find out if we're getting access to the PowerPoint presentation. I'll make sure that there is access. I'll get back to the admin. Normally, we host this on Webinar Jam, which allows you access to the recording. But this is we will make the presentation available. I'll just speak to the admin at the Institute of IT Professionals and ensure that it's available for anyone asking for it. So are there legit Bitcoin investors who can actually trade? Are there legit Bitcoin investors who can actually trade? So I think what the question means is that is there people you can successfully trade with using Bitcoin? So handing your Bitcoin over to someone who can trade it for you. I mean, for me, I don't recommend that, because I think the simplest way to get involved in Bitcoin is just to buy one. So just get on an exchange and buy a few $100 or whatever you want to, and then you will get the benefit of the explosion of the of the value in relation to fiat currencies. So you don't necessarily have to invest with anyone. You don't need permission to go out and buy Bitcoin, and it's easy enough to get on an exchange and do it. However, if you do want to invest, the difficulty is that if you sending Bitcoin to someone, because it's pseudonymous and because it's very difficult to track it's very easy for people just to take the funds and run away, even if they look very legitimate in the beginning. So in this kind of environment, it's very difficult to trust people because it's so easy to just take the Bitcoin and run, because there's no, it's not like sending it to a registered bank account or something. It's a lot more difficult to track the Bitcoin and the funds. I have seen some legitimate people, like I've seen provide properly regulated Bitcoin funds, but they do require like a very large amount to invest. So like over 100K. So, those are pretty much out of reach of most people. So I think the best advice I can give is to just, buy some crypto on your own using an exchange and keep it. It's going to really, go up in value over the next couple of years. Yeah. So the next question is that looks like the law has no clear set rules against crimes leveled on cryptocurrency. I think that's correct in general, because it's quite new. I do know like our South African Reserve Bank does have a crypto unit, and they call it they do have a team that looks at crypto and tries to set regulations and rules around it, but that's more around foreign exchange rules and how people should interact with it in terms of taxation, etc. But other than that, it is very not different countries have different rules and regulations, and there's no standard set at the moment. But I think that will change, and we start seeing some more clear rules and guidelines. There is great moves to regulate various, institutions, etc. So crypto exchanges, for example, will be seen as normal financial institutions. They will have to know your customer. They will have to do anti-money laundering. They will have to be registered as foreign exchange providers, so that they're in line with the regulations for foreign exchange. So all those regulations are coming through, especially in South Africa, also across the world. And as it gets more regulated, you'll see the enforcement becoming more standardized as well, once law enforcement understands how to deal with these kind of crimes. The next one is, even legitimate FTX collapse. Yeah, that's correct. FTX was a very well-known entity, but still, and it proves the point that even if it's well regulated and even if it appears well managed, you just can't predict what's going to happen, especially if because what happens is that there's always this they always have this temptation to over leverage. So leverage is when you trade, but you trade on margin, and on margin means you can get 10 times leverage on your trades. It's always a temptation to do that. And once exchanges start doing that, there's a danger of collapse, because inevitably there will be a downturn. Inevitably they will lose like massive amounts of money because they're so over leveraged. So it's important to understand that you don't need someone else to trade for you. You do need an exchange to easily buy crypto, but you should keep your crypto in your own privately owned wallet, or better yet, use hardware devices like Trezor or that kind of thing that keeps you safe, and not have it in an online wallet. Have a hardware wallet or a wallet or software wallet that's on your computer, where you own the private and public keys. So that's the safest way to safeguard your crypto. And that's probably a good way to go about investing in it. The next question is it not by design, though, that Bitcoin must not be regulated? Yes, that's a good point. So when Bitcoin was first initiated, there was a whole movement against the institutions like government and banking, because in 2008, 2009, there was a massive financial crisis. There were bank overruns. There were certain countries like Cyprus, Greece that were not allowing people to withdraw money that they owned from the banks. And so Bitcoin was created to get past these institutions and governments which were not servicing the needs of the people. And the nature of it allowed people to just transact and to keep their funds away from government interference. And that was the basic ideas behind it. What we're finding that once Bitcoin has become more mainstream is that we're getting major institutions involved that are purchasing Bitcoin for retirement funds. You have hedge funds purchasing. We're also getting to an era where there's Ponzi schemes that are ripping people off, and also in general, because the general population finds it difficult to understand the Bitcoin technology, it's easy for scammers to just to dupe people and to take money from them. And because people are so attracted to the money-making opportunity that they don't, and because it's difficult to understand, it's easy for people to scam them. That's why you're seeing more and more regulation coming in. Is that good for Bitcoin? It's not what it was designed to be, but for mass adoption, it's possibly a good thing, because if there's regulation and it's safer for people, then more people will adopt it. Also, as the user interface gets easier to use and there's better standards around it, regulation, and that will lead to bigger mass adoption. But it's a good point. It was never designed to be regulated, so that is a point here. So are there tools that can tell what exchange is hosting an address? For example, can you tell if a Bitcoin address is used by a Luno customer? Yeah, so if you look at the Wallet Explorer, so the Wallet Explorer will identify the exchange that has used that if it can. So it is possible to do that, but obviously it's a lot of data, and it's luck of the draw. I mean, sometimes it'll show up on a tool like Wallet Explorer, but sometimes it may not recognize it, but it's definitely something that Wallet Explorer can help with you. So that was the questions. I think with other blockchains, there are similar concepts. Okay, most blockchains have a blockchain explorer. Most of them have a concept of a transaction, and they use some form of cryptography to lock and unlock the transaction. So a lot of what I talked about can be applied to other blockchains as well. But I knew Bitcoin the best, so I spoke about that because that's the area that I'm most familiar with. But like last year, when a colleague asked me to help them track their funds, it was on the Tron blockchain. I was able to use all the concepts I knew about Bitcoin on the Tron. I was able to use the Explorer, track the transaction IDs, track the addresses, and that kind of thing. So it can be easily applied to other blockchains as well. Are there any other questions or comments? I think that's that should be a wrap up of the event. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and I hope you're able to attend. There are a number of other events coming out, so I hope you keep an eye on them. So not specifically with blockchain SIG, but in other areas as well. So there are some very good speakers coming online this month and next month. So hope you can attend them as well, and hope everyone has a really great afternoon. And I'll make sure that this presentation is available. Thank you.